The silence in Antarctica isn't empty, it's heavy. It's the weight of a continent's worth of ice pressing down, a pressure that seeps into your bones and quiets your thoughts until you can hear the faint, frantic drum of your own heart. Doctor. Ilara Vance had come to cherish that silence. Down here, 2 miles beneath the polar plateau at Icebreaker Deep, the silence was the entire point. Her job was to listen to the whispers of the universe, to sift through the roar of the sun and the static of the cosmos for the ghostliest of particles and neutrinos. They were shy things, streaming through planets and stars and people as if they weren't there at all, leaving behind only the faintest of tremors in the hypersensitive optical sensors that line the cavernous, ice-carved observatory. For 5 years, Ilara's world had been a symphony of randomness, a beautiful, meaningless chaos. Until the pattern started, it began as an anomaly, a flicker in the data stream so subtle that the station's diagnostic AI dismissed it as a sensor calibration error, a string of neutrino detections, logged from a patch of sky in the Bota's void, were arriving with a rhythm that was anything but random. It was a pulse, a stutter in the cosmic background noise as precise and deliberate as a metronome. At first, she thought it was a flaw in her own perception, a mind starved for meaning finding faces in the clouds. But the signal persisted, a faint, repeating sequence buried beneath terabytes of cosmic noise. It was a triplet, a pause, a quintet, a pause, then a doublet. Prime numbers. A language so fundamental it could only be intentional. Ilara ran the diagnostic again, then a third time. She manually recalibrated the sensors, a painstaking process that took 36 hours and earned her a terse reprimand from the surface director, Eris Thorne. Thorne was a man who had long ago traded curiosity for a pension plan, and his only interest in Icebreaker Deep was ensuring it ran its final 6 months without an incident that might delay its decommissioning. "The station is dying, Ilara," he'd said over the crackling comms, his voice thin and weary. "The consortium isn't funding repairs on a ghost ship. Log it as an artifact and move on." But she couldn't. The signal felt like a hook snagged in her gut. It was wrong. Neutrinos didn't behave this way. They were products of raw, violent physics supernovas, stellar fusion not careful, mathematical composition. To see them align in such a way was like watching grains of sand on a beach spontaneously arrange themselves to spell out your name. She spent weeks in a fugue state, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing, gnawing obsession. She bypassed Thorne's authority, routing the data through a private, encrypted server to the only person she knew who wouldn't immediately dismiss her as insane Kalen, a disgraced data analyst who'd been cast out of the scientific community 5 years prior for chasing what he called symmetrical phenomena. The establishment called it fabricating data to support a crackpot theory. Kalen called it listening to the math. His reply came 2 days later, not as a text or an email, but as a single, raw audio file. There was no greeting, just the sound of wind howling, followed by Kalen's voice, rough and sandpapery. "It's not a message, Ilara. It's a map. And it's pointing to a place that doesn't exist." Over the next week, they worked in secret, building a 3-dimensional model from the neutrino pulses. The prime numbers weren't a code to be broken. They were coordinates, vectors, and gravitational constants. They painted a picture of a solar system, complete with a binary star and 7 planets, all tucked neatly inside the Bota's void, a region of space so famously empty it was known as the Great Nothing. It was impossible. A star system that large would be visible to every telescope on and off the planet. Yet, there was nothing there. It's not that it's invisible, Kalen theorized during one of their hushed, late-night calls. It's that it's redacted. Something is bending light and energy around that entire sector of space. A natural phenomenon on that scale is unheard of. This is artificial. The final part of the signal was the most disturbing. It wasn't a sequence of numbers, but a single, sustained pulse that carried a complex data packet. It described a physical constant, a mathematical value that had no place in known physics. It was a number that, when applied to quantum mechanics, resulted in the perfect, total cancellation of energy and matter. Not an explosion, not a transformation, just a cessation, an elegant, terrifying equation for zero. Kalen had no name for it, so Elara gave it one. The hollow. She knew she couldn't sit on it any longer. This wasn't just an anomaly. It was a discovery that would redefine humanity's understanding of the universe. It could also be a warning. She compiled her data, the neutrino logs, the 3D map, Kalen's light-bending hypothesis, and the chilling mathematics of the hollow, and prepared to send it to the Global Science Consortium, blowing past Thorn and whatever administrative fallout came her way. She hit send, and, for a moment, felt a profound sense of relief. It was out. The truth was out. 20 minutes later, the station's external communication lines went dead. Not just her encrypted channel, but everything. The main uplink to the surface, the emergency comms, even the ancient, hard-wired diagnostic feed. A red icon flashed on her terminal. External network severed. Authorized personnel only. A cold dread, colder than the ice surrounding her, began to creep up her spine. An hour after that, a new sound broke the station's deep silence. It was a grinding, mechanical groan from above, the sound of the massive borehole elevator being activated. It was the only way in or out of Icebreaker Deep, a transport system used only for crew changes every 6 months and for critical cargo. The next rotation wasn't for another 8 weeks. Elara watched on the security feed as the elevator car descended, its floodlights cutting a stark white cone through the darkness. When it reached the observatory floor, the doors hissed open. But the people who stepped out weren't scientists or engineers. They were 4 figures dressed in sterile, gray environmental suits, their faces obscured by polarized visors. They moved with a quiet, synchronized efficiency that spoke of training and discipline. They carried no weapons, only black cases and diagnostic pads. One of them, a woman whose suit seemed tailored with a sharper, more authoritative cut, approached the main console where a terrified junior technician was on duty. Elara couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the technician recoil, then slowly nod and step away from his post. The woman tilted her head, her visor reflecting the cold blue light of the sensors, and looked directly at the security camera Elara was peering through. It felt as if she was staring right into her soul. A message appeared on Elara's screen, sent from the station's internal network. It was from Director Thorn. Elara, there's been a change of plans. The consortium has moved up the decommissioning schedule due to seismic instability in the region. A quarantine team is here to oversee the shutdown. Your cooperation is expected. Seismic instability. Quarantine. The words were clinical, sterile, and utterly false. It was a lie. A cover story so thin it was transparent. They were here for the signal. They were here to bury it. Kalen's frantic voice suddenly crackled to life in her private earpiece, a device he'd insisted she wear, powered by a separate, localized network. They're not a quarantine team, Ilara. I ran their transport's transponder signature against old databases. It's a shell corp registered to the Consortium's Special Projects Division. The same people who shut me down. They don't decommission facilities. They sterilize them. Get out of there. Now. But there was no out. The only exit was guarded by the gray-suited figures. Ilara's mind raced, her heart hammering against her ribs. They would wipe the servers, melt the hard drives, and write a report about a tragic geological accident. The signal, the map, the hollow, it would all be gone, as if it had never existed. But they didn't know everything. They thought the data was just electronic, just bits and bytes. They didn't know about the core. Part of Icebreaker Deep's mission was to collect pristine ice cores from the surrounding observatory walls, samples of ice that had been locked away from the world for millions of years. Neutrino interactions, while rare, left behind microscopic fractures, trace isotopic signatures in the ice crystals themselves, a physical record of their passage. Over the past few weeks, Ilara had focused a drilling laser on the section of the wall that faced the Buddha's void, collecting a core sample that held the physical proof of the signal. The triplet, the quintet, the doublet, the entire pattern was etched into the crystalline structure of the ice, a fossilized message from a ghost star. It was her only copy, the only proof that couldn't be erased with a magnetic pulse. She looked at the schematic of the station on her wall. There was one other way out, a path not meant for people. It was a series of narrow, claustrophobic maintenance shafts that snaked their way up to the surface, designed to vent excess heat from the geothermal drills that had first carved out the station. It was a dangerous, near-vertical 2-mile climb through machinery and ice, ending at an emergency hatch a dozen kilometers from the main surface facility, a suicide run. But it was the only run she had. She sent a single character back to Kalen's secure channel year. Then she smashed her terminal, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of black glass. She moved quickly, her actions fueled by a pure, cold adrenaline. She slipped on a thermal undersuit, grabbed a small pack with emergency rations and a signal flare, and made her way to the cryo storage lab. The ice core was there, a meter-long cylinder of perfectly clear ice resting in its containment sleeve. It was heavy, awkward, but she wrapped it in insulating foam and shoved it into a reinforced carrier pack. Just as she secured the straps, a soft, synthetic chime echoed through the station's PA system. Dr. Vance. A calm, female voice announced, devoid of any emotion. It was the woman from the elevator. Please report to the Central Command Deck. We need to discuss your recent unauthorized transmission. The voice was polite, almost gentle, but it carried an unspoken threat as heavy as the ice above. They were playing a game, pretending this was a bureaucratic procedure. But Ilara knew the truth. They wouldn't ask a second time. Ignoring the summons, she slipped out of the lab and into a service corridor, her boots echoing softly on the metal grate floor. The maintenance shaft was at the far end of the station, near the geothermal converters that kept the observatory from freezing into a solid block. The air grew warmer, thick with the hum of heavy machinery. She found the access panel, a heavy steel plate bolted to the wall. Her fingers, numb with cold and fear, fumbled with the release lever. It was rusted shut. She threw her shoulder against it, once, twice, grunting with the effort. It wouldn't budge. Footsteps. She froze, pressing herself into the shadows. Two of the gray-suited figures were moving down the main corridor, their movements methodical, sweeping the area with handheld scanners. They were hunting for her. Panic seized her, a cold fist closing around her lungs. She was trapped. Then she remembered the flare in her pack. It was a desperate, stupid idea, but it was the only one she had. She pulled it out, twisted the cap, and struck the igniter. It erupted in a brilliant, blinding wash of crimson light, sputtering violently. She didn't throw it at them. She jammed it into the rusted seam of the access panel's hinge. The metal shrieked as the intense, focused heat of the flare began to warp and melt the corroded lock. The figures saw the light and broke into a run, their quiet efficiency replaced with urgent, powerful strides. The lock glowed cherry red, then white. With a final, agonized groan, it gave way. Ilara kicked the panel open, threw the dying flare into the darkness of the corridor to momentarily blind her pursuers, and scrambled into the shaft. She pulled the heavy steel door shut just as the first figure reached it, the sound of their fist hammering against the metal echoing behind her. She was in. The shaft was pitch black, tight, and filled with the thunderous noise of the station's life support. Cold air rushed down from above, carrying the promise of the surface. Clutching the precious ice core to her chest, Ilara Vance began to climb, leaving the silence of the deep earth behind for the howling fury of the Antarctic blizzard above. The hunt had begun. The darkness in the shaft was absolute, a physical presence that pressed in from all sides, swallowing the light from her memory. Sound was its opposite, a deafening, multi-layered roar, the hurricane rush of the main ventilation fans, the deep, rhythmic thrum of the geothermal converters, and the high-pitched whine of 1,000 different circuits combined into an industrial symphony that vibrated through the metal rungs and into Ilara's bones. The climb was a blind, vertical treadmill. Her world shrank to the few feet of ladder directly in front of her, her reality defined by the cold, biting grip of metal on her gloves and the burning protest of muscles in her arms and legs. The ice core, strapped rigidly to her back, was an unforgiving burden. Its weight threw off her center of balance, and its cold seemed to leach through the insulating foam, a constant, chilling reminder of the impossible secret she was carrying. Every rung was a victory, every 10 feet a milestone. Her mind, stripped of all other sensory input, turned inward, replaying the pattern of the signal 3, 5, 2, a cosmic heartbeat from a place that shouldn't exist. It became her mantra, a rhythm to climb to, after what felt like an eternity. A crackle in her earpiece made her flinch so violently she almost lost her grip. Kalen's voice, distorted by static, was a lifeline in the roaring dark. "Ilara, talk to me. Are you in?" She gasped for air, her throat raw. "I'm in. Climbing." Her own voice sounded foreign, a thin, reedy thing against mechanical thunder. "Good. Keep it that way," he said, his tone clipped and urgent. "I've bypassed their local network lockdown, but I'm piggybacking on the station's seismic sensors. It's a messy signal, Larry. They've sealed the observatory level. Complete lockdown. They know you're in the vents." A wave of nausea washed over her. "How long until they cut the power?" she asked. her knuckles white on the rung. "They won't," Kalen replied, and the certainty in his voice was more terrifying than the alternative. "These shafts also vent the geothermal core. If they shut down the airflow, the whole station cooks itself in about 3 hours. They can't risk it, but they're doing something else. I'm seeing pressure drops in the lower coolant pipes. They're trying to reroute the system, probably to flood the lower shaft with inert gas, or just super-chilled nitrogen. Either way, you have a head start. Use it." The knowledge that they were actively trying to kill her, not just capture her, sharpened her focus. The climb became less about endurance and more about speed. She pushed herself harder, her lungs burning with the effort, the pack feeling less like a mission and more like an anchor intent on dragging her back down into the abyss. The cold intensified as she ascended, leaving the ambient heat of the station's core behind. Patches of condensation on the rungs had frozen into treacherous, invisible sheaths of ice. Her glove slipped once, and her chin smacked hard against a rung, the impact sending a starburst of pain through her jaw. She clung there for a moment, heart hammering, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. Below her, a new sound cut through the din. It was a rhythmic, metallic clang, steady and persistent. It wasn't the station. It was someone climbing. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're in here with me." There was a pause, filled with the hiss of static. "I see it," he said, his voice grim. A single life sign, moving fast. They must have an override for the lower access panel. They're closing the distance. Alara. The abstract threat of the gray suits had now coalesced into a single, relentless pursuer in the dark. She couldn't see them, but she could feel them, a presence climbing with a tireless, mechanical efficiency she knew she couldn't match. Fear gave her a fresh surge of adrenaline. She ignored the pain, the exhaustion, and climbed with a frantic, desperate energy. The shaft began to narrow, the machinery pressing in closer. She scraped past massive cooling fins and thick bundles of fiber optic cables that felt like frozen vines. "You're about halfway." Kalen's voice crackled, a phantom guide in the darkness. "There's a junction about 200 feet above you, a diagnostic substation. The primary shaft continues straight up, but the schematics show a secondary bleed-off vent that branches east. It's smaller, but it's a straight shot to the surface. They won't expect you to take it." The substation was a small metal cage bolted to the wall of the shaft, barely large enough for a single technician. A single, dim service light cast a sickly yellow glow, the first light Ilara had seen in hours. It was a haven, and she scrambled onto the platform, her legs shaking uncontrollably. She leaned against the cage wall, gasping for breath, the ice core digging into her spine. The clanging from below was louder now, closer. She could occasionally see the faint, ghostly dance of a headlamp beam on the shaft walls far below. Her pursuer was making incredible time. She had to make a choice. The main shaft was wider, an easier climb. The bleed-off vent was a dark, narrow maw, barely wider than her shoulders. "They're not just covering this up, are they?" she asked Kalen, her voice raspy as she stared into the smaller vent. "This isn't just about a new star system." The static on the line seemed to deepen. "No," Kalen said, his voice dropping low. "I've been digging. The Consortium's Special Projects Division has a black budget that dwarfs most national defense spending. They've been monitoring the Boots Void for 50 years. 50 years. Ilara, They didn't just stumble on this. They were waiting for it. He paused. That equation you found, the hollow, it's not a discovery. It's a confirmation. They've seen it before. Whatever is out there, our gray-suited friends aren't trying to hide it from the world. They're trying to hide the world from it. The implication hit her with the force of a physical blow. The signal wasn't a greeting. It was an alarm bell, and she had been the only one to hear it. The consortium wasn't silencing a discovery. They were trying to prevent a response. A beam of light shot up from below, catching the edge of the platform and making her flinch back into the shadows. Her pursuer was less than 500 feet away. There was no more time. She unclipped a small magnesium flare from her pack, a trick she'd learned from the station's grizzled chief engineer for inspecting pipes. She struck it, and its harsh white light illuminated the bleed-off vent. It was choked with frost and what looked like frozen service cabling. It looked impassable, but Kalen had called it a straight shot. She had to trust him. She took a deep breath, shoved the burning flare into a loop on her pack to light the way, and squeezed into the narrow opening. The fit was dangerously tight. She could no longer climb with her hands and feet. She had to brace her back against one side and walk her feet up the other, inching her way upward like a spelunker in a cave. The ice core on her back scraped and snagged on every protrusion, threatening to wedge her in place forever. The flare cast dancing, monstrous shadows on the ice-choked walls. The hiss of its burning, a counterpoint to her own ragged breathing. She could hear the pursuer reach the substation below her. There was a pause. She imagined them scanning the area, seeing the two paths. Then she heard the telltale clang as they started up the main shaft. They'd made the logical choice, assuming she'd stick to the primary route. She had a lead. The rest of the climb was a blur of pain, exhaustion, and single-minded focus. The flare burned out, plunging her back into darkness. The air thinned, the brutal Antarctic cold sinking its teeth deep into her. She lost all sense of time, her universe reduced to the rough texture of the shaft wall against her back and the agonizingly slow progress upward. Finally, her head hit something solid. Metal. She had reached the top. "Kalen, I'm at the hatch." She choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "It won't open." "It's frozen solid," he replied instantly, "and probably pressure sealed from the outside. You have to break the seal. Look for the manual release valve. A wheel, probably painted red." She fumbled in the dark, her frozen fingers barely able to move. She found it. A small, spoked wheel, its surface thick with ice. She tried to turn it, but it was frozen fast. She put all her weight into it, her muscles screaming, a desperate sob escaping her lips. It didn't move. A new sound reached her from below, not from her shaft, but from the main one. A deep, grinding protest of metal. Her pursuer must have realized their mistake and was on their way back down to the substation. Or worse, the main elevator was now ascending to the surface with the rest of the team. She was out of time. With a roar of pure, primal desperation, she grabbed the wheel with both hands and pulled, her body shaking with the strain. The ice cracked. The seal groaned. With a final, explosive pop, it broke. A blast of wind and snow hammered down into the shaft, blinding her. She shoved the hatch upward, the weight of the snow on top of it, a final, cruel obstacle. It lifted just enough for her to scramble through. She collapsed onto the surface, tumbling out of the darkness of the shaft and into a world of pure, screaming white. The blizzard was a physical assault. The wind was a solid wall that stole her breath, and the snow was a blinding, stinging torrent that erased the world. There was no sky, no ground, just an infinite, churning vortex of white. The temperature was a savage, instant shock, a cold so profound it felt like burning. She was exposed, a tiny, vulnerable speck in the heart of the planet's cruelest storm. Her earpiece crackled. "Ilara, I've lost your direct signal. The storm's too thick. I'm switching to GPS burst. There's an automated weather station 6 kilometers northeast of your position. It has a geothermal heater and long-range comms. It's your only chance." 6 kilometers. In this. It might as well have been 1,000. She struggled to her feet, the wind tearing at her, the ice core a slab of dead weight on her back. She couldn't see more than 3 feet in any direction. The world wasn't white, it was the absence of everything else. Behind her, the hatch she'd emerged from was already disappearing under a fresh drift of snow. She was alone, taking a single, shuddering breath of air that felt like swallowing glass. Ilara Vance took her first step into the storm, the whispers of a ghost star her only map, the fury of a continent her new enemy. The chase had just begun. The world outside the shaft was not a world at all. It was a sensory execution. The wind didn't howl. It screamed. A solid wall of sound and force that ripped the air from Ilara's lungs and tried to tear the skin from her face. Snow, driven into needle-sharp particles, blasted against her, instantly coating her in a layer of ice. The concept of direction ceased to exist. Up, down, north, south, all were meaningless terms in the churning, infinite chaos of the whiteout. For a panicked minute, she was utterly lost, a drowning woman in an ocean of frozen air. The ice core on her back felt like a tombstone she was being forced to carry to her own grave. Then, Kalen's voice, a ghost of a signal through the storm's roaring static, flickered in her ear. Theast, 6 clicks. Station designation, Sierra Victor 7. He was a frayed thread connecting her to a reality that seemed a universe away. Northeast. She had a direction. It was a joke, a cosmic taunt. With no sun, no sky, no landmarks. It was a direction she could only guess at. She activated the tiny, wrist-mounted compass integrated into her thermal suit. The needle spun uselessly, defeated by the sheer magnetic distortion of the pole. The GPS burst Kalen had mentioned was her only hope. She pulled her arm inside her parka, shielding the device from the wind, and waited. After a tense 30 seconds, a faint map materialized on the tiny screen. A single green dot her and a blinking red icon. Northeast. The signal was weak, updating only every few minutes. But it was a map. It was a chance. The first kilometer was a brutal education in the physics of despair. The ground was not flat, but a landscape of sastrugi, wind-sculpted ridges of snow, packed as hard as concrete, rising in knife-like edges that tripped her and sent her sprawling. Each fall was a battle. The wind would try to pin her down, the cold seeping into her, whispering a seductive invitation to just lie still for a moment. But the image of the relentless, climbing figure in the shaft was burned into her mind. She wasn't just running from the storm. She was being hunted. She forced herself up each time, her body a collection of aches and bruises, and pushed forward, leaning into the wind as if it were a physical opponent. The cold was a living thing, a predator that gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. It started in her fingers and toes, a painful burning that slowly gave way to a terrifying numbness. She could feel her own movements becoming sluggish, her thoughts molasses thick, the signal, the hollow, the gray suits. It all began to feel like a distant, half-remembered dream. The only reality was the next step, and the one after that. She had to keep moving. The GPS flickered and died. She was blind again, surrounded by the featureless white roar. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through the fog of her exhaustion. She stopped, turning in a slow circle, trying to find any sign, any hint of the correct path. There was nothing. She was a ghost in her own blizzard-shrouded tomb. She might as well be on the moon. "Kaelin," she whispered into her comm, the word stolen by the wind. Only static answered. She was truly alone. She sank to her knees, the will to go on finally draining away. It was a fool's errand. She had escaped the station only to die a slower, colder death on the ice. She pictured the gray-suited woman finding her, a frozen statue clutching a cylinder of ice, a curiosity to be logged and forgotten. The futility of it all washed over her. But then, through the wind's scream, she heard it. 3, 5, 2. The pattern. It wasn't in her ear. It was in her head. A memory so vivid, it felt like a transmission. The pulse of a dying world, or a world being born. A secret so vast that a monolithic organization would commit murder to keep it quiet. They weren't just trying to kill her. They were trying to kill the message. And the message was right there, strapped to her back. It wasn't just her life she was fighting for. It was the truth. Rage, hot and pure, cut through the encroaching cold. She would not let them win. She would not let this truth die out here, unheard, in the heart of a storm. She got back to her feet, her jaw set. If she couldn't see the way forward, she would make one. She remembered Kaelin's last transmission, the direction of the blinking red icon. She visualized it, held the image in her mind, and picked a line into the blinding whiteness. It was a guess, a prayer offered to the indifferent god of the ice, but it was a direction, and it was enough. She walked for another hour, maybe 2. Time had lost all meaning. She was an automaton, a machine of flesh and bone driven by a single command: survive. She stumbled over something. Not a ridge of snow this time, but something hard, metallic. She kicked the snow away, and her boot hit it again. It was a power cell, flat and black, with a faint, residual warmth still emanating from its core. It was identical to the ones that powered the scanners the gray suits had been carrying. Her pursuer had been here. The thought sent a jolt of terror through her, but it was followed by a flicker of hope. They had dropped it. They were not infallible. They were moving fast, perhaps even faster than she was, but they were not invincible. And if they were ahead of her, it meant they were likely heading for the same destination. She was on the right track. Buoyed by this small, grim victory, she pushed on. The GPS on her wrist flickered back to life. The screen cracked, but functional. The red icon was there, closer now, blinking like a distant lighthouse in the storm. It was less than a kilometer away. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through her. She broke into a clumsy, shuffling run, her frozen limbs screaming in protest. And then she saw it, a shape, darker than the surrounding white, a ghost in the blizzard. The weather station, Sierra Victor 7. It was a squat, hexagonal structure, more a metal bunker than a building. Its sides swept clean by the wind on one side and buried in a massive drift on the other. A single communications tower rose from its roof, swaying violently in the gale. It was salvation. It was sanctuary. As she got closer, she saw the main entrance was completely blocked, sealed behind a 10-foot wall of impacted snow. There was no way through. She circled the structure, the wind hammering her, looking for another way in. On the leeward side, sheltered from the main force of the storm, was a smaller maintenance hatch, a thick steel door set into the base of the structure. It was her only way in. The handle was a solid block of ice. She chipped at it with the small multi-tool from her pack, her numb fingers making the work agonizingly slow. Behind her, the blizzard raged, but in her mind, she could hear the rhythmic clang of someone climbing a ladder in the dark. She worked with frantic energy, chipping, pulling, swearing into the wind. Finally, the ice broke away. She yanked the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. A wave of utter despair, so profound it was almost peaceful, washed over her. She had made it all this way, only to be defeated by a frozen lock. She sagged against the door, her fight gone. Then she remembered the power cell. It was still warm. She pulled it from her pocket. An idea, born of pure desperation, sparked in her mind. She wedged the thin edge of the cell into the seam of the hatch, right next to the lock mechanism. Then, using a rock she dug out of the snow, she brought it down hard on the corner of the device. The cell ruptured with a sharp crack, and the volatile lithium inside reacted with the air, producing a burst of intense, short-lived chemical heat. The metal around the lock sizzled, glowing a faint orange. She grabbed the handle, ignoring the searing pain as the superheated metal burned through her glove, and pulled with the last ounce of her strength. The lock, its internal tumblers warped by the heat, gave way with a loud, satisfying clank. The door swung inward into darkness. She stumbled inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind her, and the world went silent. The sudden absence of the wind's roar was a shock, a physical blow. The silence was absolute, broken only by her own ragged, painful gasps for air. She was in a small antechamber, a coal lock. She fumbled along the wall and found a light switch. A low-wattage bulb flickered on, revealing a small, utilitarian space. She was safe. She had made it. She unstrapped the heavy pack, laying the ice core gently on the floor as if it were a sleeping child. Her body was a symphony of pain, but she was alive. The main room of the station was just beyond another door. It was a single, circular space, filled with racks of silent electronic equipment and a central console. A small kitchenette and a bunk were built into one wall. Power was on, likely drawn from the same geothermal source as Icebreaker Deep. Her first priority was to contact Kalen, to let him know she was alive, that the message was safe. She powered up the main communications array, the machinery humming to life with a reassuring thrum. Finding Kalen's encrypted frequency took a few minutes, her frost-bitten fingers clumsy on the controls. Finally, his voice came through, clear and sharp. "Ilara, my God, I thought I'd lost you. Are you at the station?" "I'm here," she said, a sob of pure relief catching in her throat. "I'm here. Kalen, I have the core. I'm safe." "Good," he said, his own relief palpable. "Just stay put. The storm is forecast to break in 12 hours. I'm mobilizing an extraction, a private charter, off the books. Just hang on." She leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the console, closing her eyes for the first time in what felt like days. Safe. As she listened to Kalen outline his plan, a reflection on the dark screen of the console caught her eye. It was a shape, standing in the deepest shadows of the room behind her. A tall, slender figure, perfectly still. Ilara's blood ran cold. She turned slowly, her heart seizing in her chest. Leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, was the woman in the gray suit. Her polarized visor retracted to reveal a face that was calm, patient, and utterly devoid of warmth. She hadn't been chasing Ilara through the storm. She had been waiting for her. The weather station wasn't a sanctuary. It was the end of the line. "You've been very difficult, Dr. Vance," the woman said, her voice the same, emotionless tone from the station's PA system. "But I have to admit, I'm impressed." The comm link in Ilara's ear was still open, Kalen's voice a frantic, distant buzz. "Ilara, what's happening? I'm reading a proximity alert. Who's in there with you?" Ilara didn't take her eyes off the woman. The hunter had shed the bulky outer layers of the gray suit, revealing a sleek, black undersuit that hugged a lean, athletic frame. Her face was sharp, etched with a kind of weary intelligence, her eyes a pale, dispassionate gray. "He can't help you, Doctor," the woman said, her voice calm. She raised a small, black device and pressed a button. The comm in Ilara's ear went dead, replaced by a wall of hissing static. "That's better. Privacy is so rare these days." Ilara's mind, still reeling from exhaustion and cold, struggled to catch up. She was trapped. Her only connection to the outside world was severed. She instinctively took a half step back, positioning herself between the woman and the ice core. The woman noted the movement with a flicker of something that might have been amusement. "My name is Silas," she said, as if they were meeting at a conference, "and I'm here to correct a mistake. Your mistake. What you're doing is a crime," Ilara said, her voice raspy but steady. "You're burying the single most important discovery in human history." Silas sighed, a sound of profound patience. "You have it backward. I'm not burying it. I'm ensuring it stays buried. You think you've found a new star system, a message, a first contact. You're a scientist, so you see it through a lens of discovery and wonder. But you're not seeing the whole picture." She began to pace slowly around the perimeter of the room, her movements fluid and deliberate. "Imagine the universe is a dark forest, Doctor. It's teeming with life, but it's utterly silent. Why? Because any creature that makes a sound draws the attention of the predators, the smart ones, the ones that survive. They learn to hold their breath. They stay silent." Ilara stared at her, the blood draining from her face. "Humanity," Silas continued, her voice dropping, "has been screaming into that forest for 100 years. Radio, television, probes to the outer planets, a constant, childish racket. We've been lucky, unbelievably lucky. No one was close enough to hear. And the signal, Ilara whispered. The signal isn't a greeting. It's a scream. The last scream of a civilization that made a noise and drew the attention of something that enforces the silence. We've been monitoring signals like that for decades. Faint, distant echoes from across the void. Death rattles. And we have done everything in our power to make sure humanity doesn't answer them." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture far more terrifying than she had ever imagined. The consortium's Special Projects Division, Kalen's Symmetrical Phenomena, the 50 years of monitoring. They weren't explorers. They were guardians of a self-imposed quarantine. They were the zookeepers, trying to keep the monkeys from rattling the bars of the cage. The hollow equation, Elara said, the words feeling like ash in her mouth. Silas stopped pacing and looked at her, a glimmer of respect in her gray eyes. So you understood that part. It's not a weapon. Doctor, it's a signature, a law of physics unique to them. It's the mathematical proof of their existence. It's the process by which they hunt. They don't conquer. They don't destroy. They delete. They are an ontological failsafe, a self-replicating, cosmic law that seeks out and nullifies complex systems that breach a certain threshold of detectability. They are the silence at the end of the noise. And you would let worlds die just to keep us ignorant, Elara challenged, a surge of defiant anger cutting through her fear. I would sacrifice 1,000 dying worlds to ensure our own survives, Silas retorted, her composure cracking for the first time, her voice a whip crack in the silent room. You can't save a drowning man by shouting his location to the sharks. All you do is get them both killed. She took a deep breath, her calm returning. Which brings us to the ice core. It's more than just a record now, isn't it? You know what a neutrino interaction does to a crystalline lattice on a quantum level. Elara's heart sank. She did know. It was a fringe theory, something discussed in late-night bull sessions. But the math was sound. The passage of the high-energy neutrinos from the signal, in that specific, repeating pattern, would have created a quantum entanglement, a subtle, resonant frequency within the ice itself. It's a beacon, Elara breathed. A passive one, Silas confirmed, undetectable to our instruments, but to the source of that signal, it would shine like a star. You haven't just carried a message across the ice. Doctor, you've carried a lit flare into a munitions depot. As long as that core exists, it's broadcasting our exact position to the very thing we've spent a century hiding from. This was the end game. Silas didn't just want the data. She needed to destroy the physical object. Elara clutched the handle of the carrier pack, her knuckles turning white. She had brought a plague to the surface, and Silas was the only cure. "Give it to me, Dr. Vance," Silas said, her voice softening slightly. "Let's end this. No one else has to get hurt. We will erase the logs at Icebreaker. Your friend Kalen will be contained. And you will be given a new life, a comfortable one, where you can forget any of this ever happened. Forget." The thought was a violation. Forget the truth. Forget the scream. "No," Elara said, her voice low and firm. Silas's expression hardened. "Don't be a fool. You have no move left to make." "I'm not playing a game," Elara said, her eyes darting around the room, looking for anything, any advantage. Her gaze fell on the geothermal control panel near the main console. A schematic showed the station's power systems, a thick conduit running directly from a deep earth heat exchanger. An idea, wild and suicidal, began to form. Just then, the station's lights flickered. A piercing alarm began to blare, a pulsing, electronic shriek that made both women flinch. A synthesized voice filled the room. "Warning. Geothermal core overload. Primary coolant failure. Evacuate immediately." On the main console, red lights flashed, and a pressure gauge for the main reactor began to climb rapidly into the red. Kaylin. It had to be Kaylin. He couldn't talk to her, but he could talk to the station. He'd hacked the system, triggering a full-scale meltdown protocol. Silas spun toward the console, her calm finally shattering into raw urgency. "He's bluffing," she snarled, but she was already typing furiously, trying to override the command. "The safeties will hold. Are you willing to bet your life on that?" Ilara shouted over the alarm, seizing her chance. While Silas was distracted, Ilara lunged for a heavy-duty fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. It was heavy, awkward, but it was a weapon. She swung it with all her might, not at Silas, but at the reinforced glass of the main console, shattering it in an explosion of sparks and fractured screens. Silas cried out in anger and turned, but Ilara was already moving. She ran to the geothermal control panel, her mind racing. The panel was locked, requiring a key code, but next to it was the emergency purge valve, a large, red lever protected by a simple plastic cover. She smashed the cover with the extinguisher and grabbed the lever. "Don't," Silas yelled, realizing what she was about to do. "You'll blow the entire station." "You wanted this buried," Ilara screamed back, her hand tightening on the lever. "Let's bury it." She pulled the lever down. A deep, shuddering groan vibrated up from the floor, as if the earth itself was clearing its throat. The overload alarm intensified, the synthesized voice now screaming, "Core breach imminent." The station was tearing itself apart from the foundations up. Silas abandoned the console and sprinted for the antechamber, the only way out. She knew a losing fight when she saw one. The mission was a failure. Survival was now the only objective. Ilara didn't hesitate. She grabbed the ice core, her body screaming in protest, and scrambled for the station's vehicle bay, a small garage she'd seen on the schematics, accessible through a panel in the floor. She kicked it open, revealing a ladder leading down into a small, cramped space that smelled of ozone and frozen diesel. Below sat a single squat vehicle, an enclosed snowcat, a heavy-duty tracked machine built for polar exploration, her escape. She climbed down, threw the core onto the passenger seat, and squeezed into the cockpit. The keys were in the ignition, a small mercy in a world of cruelty. The engine turned over with a reluctant, grinding cough before roaring to life. The entire station was shaking now, the lights flickering wildly. Pipes burst in the ceiling above, spraying her with a freezing, foul-smelling coolant. She slammed the snowcat into gear and hit the switch to open the main garage door. With a groaning shriek of protesting metal, the heavy door began to rise, revealing the swirling, hypnotic chaos of the blizzard outside. Just as the opening was large enough to squeeze through, Silas appeared at the top of the ladder, her face a mask of cold fury. She held a small, pistol-like device, but it wasn't a gun. It was a targeted EMP launcher. She aimed it at the snowcat's engine block. Ilara didn't wait. She stomped on the accelerator, and the snowcat surged forward, its treads clawing at the concrete floor. She ducked below the dashboard as Silas fired. A brilliant blue pulse washed over the vehicle, and the engine sputtered. The lights died, and the vehicle coasted forward on momentum alone. It cleared the rising door just as the main power failed, the heavy steel slamming down behind it, sealing Silas inside the dying station. Ilara's snowcat slid out into the storm, its engine dead, its lights dark. A metal coffin in the heart of the blizzard. Behind her, a low, Deep rumble culminated in a deafening explosion that was felt more than heard. A shock wave that kicked the back of the snowcat and sent it skidding across the ice. Sierra Victor 7 was gone, buried under tons of ice and its own self-inflicted destruction. She was alive. She was free. But she was adrift in a dead machine, in the middle of an Antarctic hurricane, with a beacon to the end of the world sitting on the seat beside her. The hunt was far from over. The shockwave from the explosion was a physical blow, a deafening bass note that vibrated through the dead chassis of the snowcat and into Ilara's teeth. For a single, terrifying moment, the world outside the cracked windshield was illuminated in a flash of brilliant orange and white. A momentary sun born from the station's death throes. Then, darkness and the roaring blizzard reclaimed everything. She was alive, but she was a castaway in a steel coffin, adrift on a sea of ice. The EMP blast from Silas's weapon had fried the main systems. The engine was dead. The heater was dead. And most critically, the primary comms were dead. Panic, cold and familiar, began to creep in. But she fought it back with a grim determination. She hadn't survived the climb, the hunt, and a geothermal explosion only to freeze to death 10 kilometers from relative safety. She remembered the grizzled old engineer at Icebreaker Deep, a man named Reese, who had a deep-seated distrust of modern electronics. "Every system has a ghost," he used to say, tapping the side of a console, a hard-wired analog backup for when the fancy stuff gets zapped. She found it under a floor panel, a small shielded box with a single, heavy-duty switch labeled Emergency Reboot. It was a direct, physical connection to the battery, bypassing the fried microprocessors. She threw the switch. The snowcat shuddered. A single dim light flickered on above the dashboard, and the engine gave a pained, hacking cough. It wasn't enough to run the heater or the main lights, but the engine was turning over. The treads were live, and on a small, secondary screen, the emergency GPS beacon pulsed faintly. She was mobile. "Kaylin," she whispered into her earpiece, praying the localized comm hadn't been fried. For a moment, there was only static. Then, his voice, weak but clear, broke through. "Ilara, what in God's name was that the entire seismic grid lit up like a Christmas tree? Sierra Victor 7 is gone," she said, her voice hollow. "Silas was waiting for me." She could hear Kaylin's sharp intake of breath. "Is she?" "She was inside when it blew," Ilara replied, though a cold knot of doubt tightened in her stomach. She hadn't seen a body, only a retreat. "Kaylin, the core is a beacon, a passive, quantum beacon. That's why they wanted it. As long as it exists, it's a lighthouse pointing right at Earth." The silence on the other end was heavy with dawning horror. "Then we have to destroy it," he said finally. "No," Ilara countered, the conviction in her voice surprising even herself. "Silas said the universe is a dark forest. She's wrong. It's a library. And someone is burning the books before we can read them. We don't destroy it. We use it. We answer the scream." "Answer it with what?" he demanded. "Silas's people will be descending on you in force. My extraction team is still hours away." "I don't need extraction. I need an amplifier," Ilara said, her eyes fixed on the emergency GPS. "Is there anything else out here? Anything old, powerful, and off the grid?" It took him a few minutes of frantic searching through old satellite archives. "There is," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. Project Chimera, a Cold War relic. It was a deep space radio telescope array built to listen for Soviet signals bounced off the moon. Obsolete for 70 years, it's 80 kilometers from your position, due north. It has its own geothermal power source. If the core is intact, it might just be the biggest megaphone on the planet. A new destination, a new hope, with Kaylin feeding her intermittent coordinates. Elara guided the crippled snowcat north, a ghost moving through a storm. The journey was a slow, agonizing crawl. Without proper lights, she was driving nearly blind, navigating by the faint contours of the snow revealed in the ambient. Storm-diffused light. Hours bled together, just as the blizzard began to show the first signs of abating. A new icon appeared on Kaylin's makeshift radar, which he was relaying to her screen. It was another vehicle, moving fast, closing in on her position from the southeast. "Elara, you've got company," Kaylin warned. "It's a military-grade transport, fast mover class. It has to be them." Silas. The knot in Elara's stomach was right. She hadn't died in the fire. She had escaped, and now she was coming to finish the job. There was no outrunning her. Elara's only chance was to get to the Chimera array first. She pushed the snowcat's damaged engine to its limit, the machine groaning in protest. The array appeared out of the thinning snow like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast. 3 massive radio dishes, each 100 meters across, were aimed at the sky, their white surfaces covered in a filigree of frost, their steel lattices groaning in the wind. A single, squat control building was nestled at their base. She slid the snowcat to a halt and scrambled out. The ice core clutched in her arms. The air was still bitingly cold, but the wind had lost its fury, and the sky was a bruised, pre-dawn purple. She found the entrance to the control building, its door unlocked but frozen shut. Using a crowbar from the snowcat's emergency kit, she pried it open and stepped inside, into a time capsule. The technology was ancient, all analog dials, heavy switches, and vacuum tube monitors. But the place was immaculate, preserved by the dry, sterile cold. And, miraculously, the power was on. A low hum emanated from the geothermal conduits running through the walls. "Kaylin, I'm in," she said, her breath fogging in the frigid air. "Talk me through it." Guided by Kaylin's frantic instructions, she began the process of waking the sleeping giant. She rerouted power, manually aligned the main dish, and calibrated the transmitter. The final, most crucial step was to interface the ice core with the signal amplifier. There was no port for it, no simple connection. She had to improvise. She placed the core directly against the primary waveguide, a thick copper conduit that fed the signal from the console to the dish. She then jury-rigged a feedback loop, using the station's own sensors to read the faint resonance from the ice and feed it back into the system, creating a self-amplifying signal. The console hummed, and on an old oscilloscope, a waveform appeared: the triplet, the quintet, the doublet, the scream. She was ready. Just as her hand hovered over the main broadcast switch, the building's entrance door was kicked open. Silas stood there, her black suit torn and scorched, her face smeared with soot, a deep gash across her forehead. In her hands, she held a kinetic carbine. "It's over. Doctor," she said, her voice a low growl. "You've made your point. Now step away from the console." "Never," Ilara said, shielding the switch with her body. Silas raised the rifle. I don't want to kill you, but I will sacrifice one life to save 8 billion. Behind Silas, through the open door, Ilara could see the first rays of dawn breaking over the ice plain. In the same instant, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Silas flinched, recognizing the sound. One of the massive dishes outside, its support structure weakened by decades of ice and the vibrations from the station explosion, began to groan. A support strut snapped with a sound like a cannon shot. Silas glanced over her shoulder for a fatal second. It was the only opening Ilara would get. She didn't charge Silas. She charged the console, throwing her entire body against the main broadcast switch. She hit it, and the world dissolved into pure, white noise. The power surge was immense. The lights exploded. The consoles sparked, and a sound like the sky tearing apart filled the room. The amplified quantum signal, the fossilized scream of a dying world, erupted from the dish and blazed a trail into the cosmos. The feedback loop was too powerful. The ice core glowed with an intense blue light, then shattered, its physical form sublimating in a silent flash of energy. The broadcast was a single, infinitesimally brief pulse, but it was away. It was done. The dying dish outside finally gave way. With a scream of twisting metal, the 1,000-ton structure began to collapse, falling directly toward the control building. Silas, caught between her target and the apocalypse descending upon them, made her choice. She turned and ran out the door, diving for cover as the edge of the massive dish slammed into the building, crushing half of it into oblivion. Ilara was thrown across the room, the world vanishing into a vortex of pain and roaring metal. She awoke to silence, the profound, heavy silence of the Antarctic. The storm was over. The sky above, visible through the mangled ruin of the ceiling, was a brilliant, cloudless blue. She was alive, buried in rubble, her body a tapestry of agony, but alive. Of Silas, there was no sign. Ilara had won. She had shouted back into the dark forest. The consequences of that act were unknown. Perhaps she had doomed humanity. Perhaps she had saved them by showing them the truth. Or perhaps she had done something else entirely. In the years that followed, the world changed. The consortium was exposed, its monolithic authority shattered. Kalen, using Ilara's logs, became the reluctant prophet of a new age of cosmic awareness. Humanity, faced with the terrifying knowledge of the dark forest and the silent hunters within it, did not panic. It did not collapse. It began to listen. The great silence, as it had been known, was over. Now, there was the great watchfulness. Ilara, after her rescue, vanished from the public eye. She took a quiet post at a remote observatory in the Atacama Desert, a place of clear skies and deep quiet. She never spoke of what she had done, but she never stopped watching. Every night, she would look up at the Bota's void, at the space where the ghost star had screamed, and she would listen. The universe remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence of something that had heard a noise and was now listening, patiently, for the next one. The silence of something that was, at last, looking back.